This meeting is now being recorded.
Right. Let's get started. So good morning, afternoon, and evening. Welcome and thank you for participating in this month's new partner webinar, SEI and SNV presentation on behavior change insights in the clean cooking sector. My name is Kavanaugh Livingston, and I'm a Senior Associate for Partnerships at the Global Alliance for Clean Cook Stoves. This webinar is part of a series that provides an introduction to the Alliance for new and current partners and an overview of how we work, the benefits of partnership, highlights, upcoming opportunities for partners, and features on specific tools, resources, or engagement activities. After a short introduction on the Alliance, I will then hand over the presentation to our COO, Brian Smith, for introduction, who will then hand it over to our presenters at SEI, and they will provide interesting insights from research on how households make decisions to purchase and use a new stove and fuel. We will begin with a quick overview of the Alliance's mission. For those who are new to the Alliance, our objective is to create a thriving global market of clean cook stoves and fuels. This initiative was created in response to the persistent problem of household air pollution, which impacts 3 billion people who rely on solid fuels to cook their daily meals. This issue results in numerous impacts on human health, the environment and climate, local economies and livelihoods, and women and girls. The Alliance was launched in 2010 by a number of founding partners with a mission to address this multifaceted problem. The Alliance's adoption goal of 100 million households by 2020 is now at the midpoint, and we are well ahead of our projections, reaching over 50 million households with clean and /or efficient stoves and fuels. Our market-based approach is built on 3 core strategies. Through a consultative process with sector experts shortly after our launch and building upon the lessons learned by our partners over past decades, the Alliance determined that a market-based approach was the most effective way to reach our 100 million adoption target. Our approach is built on 3 core strategies and drives all of the work we do at the Alliance, including supply side, market enabling, and demand generation initiatives. The Alliance Secretariat, which is based in Washington, D.C., coordinates global activities with market managers present in our 8 focus countries in which we, quote-unquote, go deep with targeted support for clean cooking and who serve our locally based partners in the country or region. We are also pleased to report that the Alliance has over 1,600 partners from a diverse range of sectors and fields who are actively working to support and grow the clean cooking sector. If you are not registered as a partner, we encourage you to join at cleancookstoves.org/partners. As a Alliance member, what does it mean to be a partner, and how can you take advantage of some of these opportunities? The short answer is becoming a partner is the best way to stay informed of Alliance activities globally and in country. Benefits of partnership also include assistance with resources and capacity development and networking opportunities, as well as enhanced visibility. If you have any further questions on partnerships, please contact the Alliance. And finally, we would like to inform you of some new resources and upcoming opportunities. The Alliance is launching a platform to showcase the communications materials and methods being used by Alliance partners to promote clean cooking. We're developing a web-based clean cooking behavior change communications catalog. This online library will allow partners to access examples of media, as well as creative briefs, reports, toolkits, and evaluation results to learn and build from previous and existing work being conducted to promote clean cooking. If your organization has behavior change, communication, awareness raising, or marketing materials related to clean cooking, please send them to knowledge@cleancookstoves.org to have them included in the forthcoming catalog. In addition, if you had not had a chance to review the Alliance's 2016 progress report, Clean Cooking, Key to Achieving Global Development and Climate Goals, we encourage you to do so. The report highlights important and significant progress of the partnership's efforts to strengthen the clean cooking sector. Thank you for your attention. I will now hand over the presentation to the Alliance's COO, Brian Smith.
Thank you, Kavanaugh. I just want to make sure you can hear me okay.
Hear you.
You can hear me okay?
Yes, Brian, we can hear you.
Okay, great. So as Kavanaugh mentioned, I'm Brian Smith. I am the Chief Operating Officer here at the Alliance. I just want to very briefly provide some context and a brief intro to what you're going to hear today. As many of you may know, as part of our work on demand creation, we have received a grant from the UK government to strengthen behavior change communication in the sector. Now, most of that effort has been our awarding several grants for behavior change communication activities and for enterprises to strengthen their marketing in focus countries. But in addition to that grant making, we are also trying to contribute to learning around behavior change communication in the sector and basically try to make it easier for people who are implementing behavior change programs to do more and better work. The catalog that Kavanaugh just mentioned is one such effort to share learning across the sector. And so are these webinars. So this is a webinar that will be in a series in which we hope to invite partners to present the work that they've been doing. Today, we'll be hearing from Stockholm Environmental Institute, SEI, who has been doing a lot of different work in the cook stoves and fuel sector, including in behavior change communication. So with that introduction, I'm really looking forward to hearing the presentation now from Oliver and Marie. Thanks.
Hi, so I take that as my cue, Brian. So hi everyone, my name is Marie Juriso. I'm a research fellow based at the Stockholm Environment Institute's Stockholm Center. I will today talk briefly about two parts of our work. I will begin by just giving an overview of a wider research initiative that we've started at SEI called the SEI Initiative on Behavior and Choice, where we're essentially looking into factors that influence decision-making that leads to sustainability, for instance, through the uptake of a technology. After I've done that, I will give two examples of how we've worked with cook stoves in this initiative. I would also just like to apologize for the fact that I will have to leave at 9 a.m. sharp, so if I'm not around to answer any outstanding questions after that, please feel free to email me. So why are we interested in behavior and choice at SEI, and why are we studying multi-level drivers of behavior change? Well, I think many of us that have been working in this field for a while have seen that for development interventions to be successful, many ultimately rely on people to change their behavior, for instance, by adopting a new cooking practice. But what many interventions fail to acknowledge is the sort of human dimension that's involved in this process. So, for instance, leaving out things like personal motivation to change behavior, personality traits. These are often not taken into account in the design of interventions, and also not necessarily in the implementation of intervention. So our starting point here is that we really need to better understand both the cognitive but also the social factors that influence human behavior in the household. And we also acknowledge that these factors that influence human behavior, they operate in tandem and on many different levels, which from a research perspective means that you often need to be an expert in many different disciplines, everything from ethnography to sociology to political science to psychology, to cover all these different levels. But because these academic disciplines are different or separate, we tend to have a limited knowledge of how they interact and influence each other, and then so there's a lack of an understanding of how they operate in tandem and what the ultimate influence is. And this is of course useful then to have a better understanding of if you want to design interventions that can achieve lasting change. So this is why we started then roughly 2 years ago what we call the SEI Initiative on Behavior and Choice, and this is largely funded by SIDA, the Swedish International Development Agency. And what we do then, or what we've done so far, is that we've explored factors on different levels in society that ultimately influence household choice and decision making related to technology adoption. So if you look at this Venn diagram to the left, you see that we've studied internal factors, we've studied things related to peer effects, and we've also studied things related to actor-structure relationships, so going a bit higher up. In that, we've also begun to get an understanding of inter-household relationships, and we've also begun to make an effort at synthesizing all these different level insights. Much of the work is still in progress, and we are at times we feel like it's a very, all the time we feel that it's a very exciting experiment, but at times we also wonder whether it will ever lead us to anything that's actually useful. But I'll get back to you on that one. But what we've done is that we've applied a range of different research methods, so working with everything from human-centered design, which I will tell you more about in just a minute, to more sort of ethnographic or sociological methods, and also working more in sort of traditional policy analysis. And we're hoping then that this will result in, on the one hand, new tools and methods for gathering end-user insights, and also a framework that can be useful for understanding behavior and choice. Our key boundary partners so far in the Cookstove work have been the Kenyan government and also Kenyan and Zambian Cookstove implementers. So this gives you a preview to the fact that I'll be speaking now then about 2 case studies that we've done on the purchase and adoption of advanced cookstoves in Kenya and Zambia, looking at internal factors that influence behavior and choice related to cookstove adoption. I'm not sure what I can do about the fact that you can't see the slides of the presentation. Kavanaugh, is there anything you can you work your magic there, perhaps? In the meantime, I will keep going. But our starting point then in this analytical work has really been that people don't think straight. People aren't rational. Quite the opposite. We as people, we think in different ways. We think automatically, which means that there's a tendency for all of us to use shortcuts and to really take the easy way when faced with a choice. We tend to avoid high effort thinking and tend to avoid to engage in processes that really require us to deliberate in processes. We also think socially, which means that we tend to replicate the behavior of our peers and our neighbors. So essentially, do what people around us are doing, and also tend to take the opinions of others around us. We also think using mental models, so using sort of preconceived notions of how the world works, which also leads us to be quite resistant to change. And with these starting positions, then we set out to explore in Kenya and Zambia what motivates people to adopt an advanced cookstove, and what support do people need at what point in the adoption process to get the stove to work for them. And how did we do this then? So as I mentioned briefly earlier, we used human-centered design research methods, which is an approach that's quite new to us at SEI. We also chose to work with professional consultants in this area, so to really work with people that have a lot of experience applying these methods. We we did deep, semi-structured and open-ended interviews with almost 40 people that had purchased and started to use an advanced cook stove, so roughly 20 in Kenya and roughly 20 in Zambia. We also observed users in their homes, so we spent between sort of 1 and 4 hours in each person's home. Sometimes we participate in cooking, sometimes we help with other chores, sometimes we just hung around to get a sense of what their everyday life was like. And many of the questions we asked were not tailored specifically to the technology as such, but more revolved around just the everyday life situation. To support the interviews or the guiding of a question, we used a lot of visual material to guide our conversations. It was everything from pre-prepared pictures to sketches and to pens and paper. And this proved to be very, very useful to trigger responses to questions that are otherwise very difficult to convey in response to a direct question. This trigger material was also extremely powerful in giving sort of equal agency to everyone that was present at the interview situation. And I think it really highlighted that it was the user of the cook stove that was the expert here, not in any way the visiting researcher or human-centered designer. And our focus then was to really understand, as I said, the entire experience on the one hand with the cook stove and how it fits their everyday life, but also how it fits into their understanding and expectation of what cooking technologies should bring to their everyday life. And we then used all the findings that we derived to build user journeys, which is something that I will come back to in a minute. But just to give you briefly a bit more insight into the two different cases. So we went to peri-urban Kiambu County, just northwest of Nairobi. And here we spoke to users that were cooking on the Philips cook stove. You can see it there in a slightly funny shape. They were all women that we interviewed had bought the stove through their women's group, and their women's group had a collaboration going with a microfinance institute called the Visionary Empowerment Program. So the Visionary Empowerment Program provided microfinance solutions for the women, so it made them, essentially gave them financial enabling conditions to purchase the stove. The 19 interviews that we did were with women that had been using the stove for between 2 weeks and 9 months. This meant that none of the people that we spoke to had gotten to the point where the stove had broken down or where they had begun looking for other options, but we saw that some level of adoption process or certain elements of behavior change had begun to happen in all households. And as you see from the picture here with my colleague Fiona, we used different types of trigger material to elicit responses. And this was in October 2015. Then in April 2016, so just this spring, we did a similar round of interviews in urban Lusaka in Zambia. Here we looked at users that had purchased those from two different companies. So one company, again, that was selling the Philips stove, the advanced cook stove, mostly through payroll reduction schemes. And then a company that was selling two different types of locally manufactured stoves that were sold primarily through local hubs or shops in certain neighborhoods in Lusaka. We had a very similar approach here. We did just under 20 interviews. We used the same type of visual material and spent, again, quite a long time in each interview situation. So what did we find then, and how did we sort these insights? So, as I mentioned at the beginning, the purpose of gathering all this data was that we wanted to build user journeys that highlighted the whole process of adoption, from sort of initial exposure to getting started with technology to establishing a new cooking routine. And you'll see an overview of it here. So this user journey essentially shows the decision-making process that a user has to go through to adopt a cook stove. In each of the red dots, they implement or they indicate sort of key events in each phase. So in the before phase, in the purchasing phase, the user has to become aware of the stove and also has to purchase it. In the during phase, we identified sort of two main elements: the element of learning and getting started with a new technology, and the second element being the point at which a new habit has been established. As I mentioned briefly earlier, we didn't interview a single person that had come to the after stage in their adoption process. The blue dots, they indicate things that can go wrong at different points in the user journey. So in the before phase, problems that you can encounter, for instance, that the stove is not available or that you cannot afford it. In the during phase, problems relate often to the malfunctioning of the stove or the stove not meeting expectations. And then the green dots were missed opportunities that we identified for providing support to really change cooking habits. If we go to the findings then, our findings on the main motivations for purchase were largely sort of reconfirmed what we know from the literature. I think there were three dominating factors. One, the most prominent one was the prospect of saving money and or fuel, something that was where it was very clear that many users at this stage had actually engaged in more sort of high effort or deliberate thinking, trying to reason and understand how they could actually save money from these devices. The second most common reason was the added convenience or the prospect of either saving time or being able to cook faster, not having to monitor the stove, also not having to handle charcoal and dirty one's hands. And the third most common reason was the aesthetic and aspirational appeal of the stove. So these were really the main sort of motivations or drivers for purchase. What we also saw is, of course, what we already know, that access to finance is absolutely critical. And we saw then that, obviously, because we interviewed customers of these two companies, or three companies in Kenya and Zambia, the resellers had done many of these things right. They'd managed to tap into people's motivations and aspirations, and also to provide a financial enabling mechanism. But what was very striking was that we saw that when we got to the during phase, so once we tried to understand what motivates people to actually develop a new cooking practice, so what motivates people to learn how to use the stove and what motivates people to go through the effort that it actually takes to develop a new cooking habit, we saw that the decisive factor that comes in at this during stage is very, very different from the before phase. So what really matters once people have the stoves in their home is whether it works well and whether it works as expected and whether it meets the expectations that were gathered in the before phase. So the motivations for purchase are really not the same as the motivations for learning how to use the stove. Quite the opposite, we saw that many users would abandon the stove partially or entirely in frustration because it was not functioning as they expected, or they would choose to use it primarily for simple cooking tasks. And therefore, to us, it became very, very clear, using this way to structure facts, that it's absolutely crucial to have a system in place that helps remotivate users once they encounter problems in their homes. And through our research, we identified several sort of missed opportunities for both technical and social support that can help remotivate users and customers once they have the stoves in their homes. So everything from going away from quick sales pitches to letting people try to cook the stove at demonstrations, to having a legible user manual, to thinking very carefully about stove design and the functioning and technical aspects of the stove. Also to have active follow-ups, and not just to wait for customers to come and report on problems, but to have in place sort of social support enabling mechanisms, and to ideally embed the distribution system in an existing social channel. And this again is really just to tap into people's way of thinking and to make it easier for a new cooking practice or a new habit to develop. a key insight from this user journey process, I think, is really that the process of adopting a new technology is really not a one-off event, but involves choosing to use the new tech stove or any new technology over and over and over and over again until a new practice is established. And therefore, it's crucial for us to really understand when in the adoption process certain types of support mechanisms are appropriate and why. And that the factors that motivate the purchase of a stove may not be the same factors that motivate its ultimate adoption. And again, it's important to design strategies and support mechanisms that tap into these different drivers. One way could be to really help the user to manage expectations and to overcome these unexpected mishaps. So it's crucial to have such a system in place. And how can a user journey map be of use then? Is it just a research tool, or is it something that can be practically valuable as well? Well, I think, my quick answer there is yes. I think it's absolutely crucial in the sense that it highlights that the sequencing of events that lead to adoption, and that it really can be used to delineate when in the adoption process certain support mechanisms are needed. It can also be a very useful tool to test the effectiveness of specific interventions at different points in the journey, and it can also be a super important tool to validate insights, either from research or from other sort of stakeholder processes with other stakeholders. I've rushed this a bit in the interest of time, so if you want to know more and also get into the sort of nitty-gritty parts of how we design the research, the full report, including also a two-page summary for decision makers, is available on SEI's website. And also on our website, you will find a 4-page brief for practitioners, which also gives a lot more detail than I managed to convey now. But that's it from me for now. Thank you very much for listening, and I now hand over to my colleague Oliver.
Hi, Marie. Thank you so much for that terrific presentation. Actually, I was probably going to open the floor up for about 5 minutes of Q&A for anyone who's interested in providing any questions before you head off.
Okay, sure. Sorry. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one question came in from Terry in the chat window. And then for any participants who would like to pose a question to Marie, please feel free to type it into the public chat option. And Terry asked about the 20 interviews in Lusaka and why 20 and not 10 or 30.
Yeah. So what we did is that the sort of selection criteria we applied there is that we kept going for more interviews until we had a sort of until saturation was reached, as we call it. So once we started, once the same patterns or the same answers started recurring or coming back to us, then we came to the conclusion that there was no more new information to find at this point. And that happened after roughly 20 interviews, or just under 20 interviews in each location. Had we had unlimited funding and unlimited time, of course, we would have loved to do even more interviews just out of curiosity. But for the purpose of just sort of research validity, just under 20 was enough this time.
Thank you, Marie. And another question from Hugh. Can you say anything about the ideal profile of the seller to the end user?
I think what we found in this particular case is that it's absolutely crucial that there's an element of trust between the user and the seller, and that trust can be built on many different things. You can either derive that trust from selling a very reliable or aspirational product, or you can derive that trust as a reseller then from being very present in the neighborhood or in the local community, or from providing a very active follow-up support and repairs program. So really trying to build a supporting relationship with the customer is absolutely crucial, and I think what we saw, that it matters the most in that startup phase, so in the early stages of the during part of the user journey, so that the user knows who to go to for support when things go wrong, or if he or she is not super motivated to keep trying this new technology.
Marie, and I think we'll take one last question from Dana. She asked, what is a boundary partner, and what is the user or structure interface? And these terms are found in the diagram.
I think, sorry, a boundary partner. This is a diagram that I took from an SEI report. And a boundary partner, that's our internal word for stakeholder. The user structure interface. I'm not quite sure what you mean by that. Is that something I wrote? Let me just go back to that slide then. The Venn diagram. I can't actually see it there, but if you could highlight, actor-structure relationships. Sorry, so that refers to, it refers essentially to structures that are put in place at various political levels and how they influence people that operate at those levels. So it could be everything related from national regulation to local policies or rules, or even informal rules that are set within the community.
Thank you for those great questions. We're going to move the slides now to Oliver's presentation. And Oliver, feel free to start. Please stand by as we try to figure out some of these technical difficulties.
Hi. Let me know if I can make a start.
Hi, Oliver. We can hear you now.
Okay. Great. Well, I hope I'll be able to keep in time. I can't see the slides, but I have them on my computer, so hopefully we'll be we'll be synchronized. Hello, my name is Oliver Johnson. I work for the Stockholm Environment Institute, SEI, based at our Africa Center in Nairobi. And I've worked closely with Marie on some of this work on behavior and choice, particularly related to clean cooking. And what I wanted to present today was some work that we've been doing, that we did last year or this year, ended so middle of this year, in partnership with SNV, particularly around health messaging. And as Marie mentioned, there are multiple factors, of course, influencing how people is a very important issue, particularly related to cooking, and so the interest is in what is the role of health messaging or health in influencing people to make decisions to adopt cleaner cooking technologies and behaviors. So if you move on to the next slide, we know that smoke from inefficient biomass stoves, so that's inefficient stoves and traditional fuels, cause up to around 4 million premature deaths per year. And many people suffer respiratory problems and other ailments in response to exposure to indoor air pollution from use of traditional biomass stoves. But there is really limited knowledge on how the health concerns, which are largely a public health concern, actually influence individuals, the decision of individuals to purchase and use cleaner stoves. So on the one hand, you have a very big public health issue that many organizations want to do, at all levels, want to do something about, but it's not really clear how those issues are actually influenced.
Apologies for that. Looks like Oliver got disconnected. Please stand by while we try to connect him again.
Hello, Oliver here. Can you hear me now?
Yes, Oliver, we can hear you.
Sorry about that. My phone decided it had had enough and just hung up. So I was just noting that there is limited knowledge really on how health concerns influence decisions to purchase and use clean cook stoves. Assume they may be a key motivation. If you were a cook stove user, then you may notice the effects of smoke on respiratory, on your respiration, and maybe ailments, problems with eyes and weeping eyes, and so on. But studies really show that health concerns are quite low on the priority list when making decisions about cooking. So if we go to the next slide. In regards to this, SNV, who do a lot of work on cook stoves around the world, promoting clean cook stoves, they commissioned Action Research to develop and test health-focused messaging around cook stoves. So they commissioned 17 triggers and TNS in Cambodia to pursue a health messaging campaign in rural Cambodia. And in peri-urban Kenya, the Busara Center for Behavioral Economics was commissioned to explore health messaging and its influence on cook stove adoption. SEI was then asked, given the task of synthesizing the results from these two studies, and I don't know if it's coming up on the screen. I may have had some transitions, or maybe you could go forward a bit. We had only clean biomass stoves, so tiers 3 and 4 and associated fuels were included in the study, because really the research shows that if you want significant health benefits, you're going to have to get up to tier 3 and 4 stoves to really make an impact. So they were the only types of stoves considered. Lower tier stoves and associated fuels were not considered in this study. So if we go to the next slide, it should show on rural Cambodia. Just gives you an idea of the way that the study was designed. Set out a very clear question: whether health messaging is an effective purchase driver for the ACE-1 cook stove. That was the cook stove they were looking at. And there was a control group, and then a number of treatment or trial groups where a specific health message, health marketing message was applied. So there was positive health messaging and negative health messaging, and in some cases they received additional messaging. So the negative messages used imagery that depicted smoke as a sort of deadly thing, and then positive messages depicting the stove as a healthy, or a cleaner stove as healthy. So traditional unhealthy versus positive kind of a vision of the future if you use a cleaner cook stove. They all received traditional marketing materials and flyers, home visits, so that was kind of across the board. The control group and all the treatment groups received that in Cambodia. And sales agents were then recruited and trained to actually apply these marketing messages as they sold the stove. If we go on to the next slide, that's on the next bit of that slide on peri-urban Kenya. You can see the interventions slightly different there. Interventions there were images, and that was typically a negative image, a graphic image of showing the effect of smoke on lungs, but there were also SMS messages as a marketing method, and then another treatment was actually setting goals with the particular treatment group, thinking about how cook stoves, cleaner cook stoves, may be part of a goal to have a cleaner kitchen, and that was also combined with particular activities that would remove obstacles to purchase of the clean cook stove. And there was a control group that received no treatment. And again, all of those groups, including the control group, received flyers, information about health risks, and a market demonstration. A bit different from Cambodia, where there was sort of village household visits. This was more of a market demonstration. But at the same time, all of those groups received some general marketing, and then some groups received the more specific marketing treatments. Then in Kenya, one of the differences from rural Cambodia was that the study in Kenya was looking at willingness to pay, and I'll come back to this as a limitation. So it was not in rural Cambodia. They were actually there were stove agents selling stoves, whereas sales agents selling the stoves along with the marketing messaging. In Kenya, the focus was on a measure of willingness to pay. So participants were asked at the beginning and at the end what their willingness to pay for a stove was, as measured by a certain cost of the stove. and then the study looked at whether willingness to pay for a stove had changed because of the marketing messages. But importantly, they weren't necessarily expected to buy a stove. So if you go to the next slide, findings from Cambodia, and you can just click through the three points I'm making. There was first the impact on stove purchase. What was the impact of the marketing messages, health marketing messages in Cambodia? Well, it was found that there was really no impact on the likelihood of buying a new stove. So the variables that seemed to influence the likelihood of buying a stove in Cambodia were the sales agent, how much trust could they build up, and that speaks to what Marie spoke about trust between the user and the seller. The functional attributes of the stove. So does it actually do what you want it to do? Heat the food at the right temperature for that particular the particular sets of foods that those communities cook. And the price, of course, which remains a key barrier, and these advantages are often very expensive. And as I mentioned, the success there was measured in the number of stoves sold. Did the marketing message have an impact on health awareness in Cambodia? Well, it was found that awareness of the negative impact of traditional cooking methods did seem to increase from the baseline after the various treatments were applied. So following a baseline study, a follow-up survey found that yes, people did seem to have more awareness of the health impacts, and particularly the negative impacts of traditional cooking methods. So although they had a raised awareness, it didn't necessarily, the message on its own didn't necessarily have an impact, or didn't really have much of an impact on the likelihood of buying a stove. There were a number of limitations of the study. For instance, one sales agent was responsible for 24 out of the 34 sales that were made during this study. So really you had one sales agent who was just particularly good at selling the stove. And they didn't just use health marketing messages because they were there to sell the stove. So they were also, developed a rapport with users and really managed to convince them to buy the stove. So given that the other sales agents were only responsible for 10 stoves being sold between them, that was a bit of a weakness in terms of really getting some convincing results. Some negative images were difficult to interpret. You can see a picture there of a snake being formed out of smoke, and that wasn't so easy for the users, and even some sales agents to really appreciate. So that may have had an impact or reduced the impact of the negative images. Positive health visuals seem to be a lot more easily received or better understood. And really going back to that first point, the effectiveness of the sales marketing, messaging, but just sales in general, is so dependent on the sales agent's capacity. So if you have a great marketing campaign, but the sales agents don't have the capacity to sell very well, they're maybe not as engaged or maybe not as committed, then it doesn't matter how good your marketing message will be. It may fall on deaf ears or may not come across so well. So that's a really important finding there. You can't just produce a perfect marketing campaign and then expect it to be rolled out perfectly if the people rolling it out struggle to understand it or are not so committed to it. So those were some findings from Cambodia. If we now go to the findings from Kenya, we had the impact on willingness to pay. So just as a reminder, in Cambodia it was the impact on stove purchase because that was the kind of measure of success. In Kenya, it was a research institution that was undertaking the work, and they were measuring success of the health messaging campaign based on a change or in willingness to pay, an increased willingness to pay, not an actual sale of a cook stove. So that is more of a representation, but it may not, it doesn't necessarily reflect a stove purchase. The different treatments seem to have different effects. The goal-setting treatment did seem to have an impact on the willingness to pay, but the SMS and graphic imagery didn't have any impact on people's willingness to pay. When they received the SMSs over a period of time, or whether they were whether they received graphic imagery as a health marketing messaging campaign, it didn't seem to have any impact on their willingness to pay. It didn't change the way they viewed a stove, and their willingness to actually pay for that particular stove changed their behavior. When it comes to impact on health awareness, there was no statistically significant impact of any of the treatments on health awareness. In Cambodia, you might recall from the previous slide, there was an impact on health awareness, particularly the negative effects of traditional cooking methods. The interventions in Kenya didn't really seem to have any impact. However, health awareness was already rather high. So people already knew the negative impacts of traditional cooking practices and fuels and stoves. So potentially there wasn't much more to learn, and that highlights that the health messaging is not necessarily what's holding them back from making a stove purchase. The limitations include this notion that they may have grasped the risk of cooking, but they may not have grasped the seriousness of the risk. So they may be very aware of health impacts, negative health impacts, but whether they consider that as a serious risk to themselves, that wasn't really explored, and they may not think of it in that sense. Again, similar to Cambodia, the sample size was rather small, so the results, I think the results of both studies really are not conclusive, and I think they provide really interesting insights, but it was a small study, the budget was limited, so it couldn't be a full randomized control trial with really rigorous methods over a long period of time with a lot of numbers, and a lot of samples, so a lot of households. So the findings are interesting, and I think there's a lot to gain for them, but also the results, from a very rigorous academic point of view, wouldn't be seen as conclusive. There's value in them, but that's just a limitation. And it's obviously clear that it doesn't matter, how you're marketing the stove. If it's not affordable, and if it's not available, then you're marketing a product that's out of reach in a way. So that just highlights the other aspects of this, influences on decision making. So going to my final slide, which is overall insights from Cambodia and Kenya. The first insight, and I'm calling them insights, I don't think we can claim that these are sort of conclusive results because of the natures of the study, and the studies were different. So it was very hard to compare. In fact, we synthesized results and gained these insights, but the studies were not comparable. They were done separately and designed separately. That was how it was done. One looked at really selling of the stove. The other was looking at willingness to pay. So they weren't comparable, but there are really important and useful insights. And that is that, unfortunately, health messaging has a minimal effect on cook stove purchase. I think that probably coincides with other research that's been done on this. That's not to say it has no effect, and health messaging could have an effect in combination with other interventions, and that needs to be explored further. But on its own, really, health messaging is not what is convincing people or influencing people to make a decision to purchase a cook stove. There are other factors that may be more important. And of course, in different contexts where there's more disposable income, maybe that's not the case. But in these peri-urban Kenya and rural Cambodia, that is the case. And that really speaks to the question Marie posed: well, what motivates people to adopt, purchase and continually use it and use new cook stove? And it's not health messaging, health impacts, which is interesting because a lot of public funds for supporting the distribution and adoption of clean cook stove is coming from a public health angle. This is a public good. If you really want to save lives and improve the health of populations around the world, especially in poorer nations, then you need to address the cooking space. But the actual reasons for those people to adopt cleaner cooking behaviors, technologies and behavior may not be related to the health messages. So they need to be convinced in other ways. So you may get the donor, you convince the donor there will be public health impact, or at the national level, the health ministry. But for the user, they may need to be convinced in another way. And the second point is that price continues to be an important factor in their decision making. So if the price is not right, it's going to be very difficult to get anyone to adopt a stove, and we can't stress, or de-stress the price factor. There are other important aspects, and we all often speak about the broader context as the Behaviour and Choice Initiative that SEI speaks to that, about intra-household relationships, the peer relationships. What are your neighbours doing? They have a very important impact. But if the price is not acceptable, if it's not affordable, then that will continue to be a stumbling block. Awareness of health issues varies from place to place. So in Cambodia, it wasn't so high. In the rural areas of Cambodia, in peri-urban Kenya, it was high. There may be then a way to utilize that awareness to somehow build upon it, and with a range of interventions to convince and influence users to adopt cleaner technologies and fuels and practices. But it's important to appreciate that health varies from place to place, because you don't want to assume that everyone is aware of the health impact. But in some cases they may be, and that needs to be taken into account. Otherwise you may be just boring people. They know already, so something else needs to be done. The fourth point is that skill and motivation of individual sales agents greatly affects marketing campaigns. Regardless of its health, it seems that it would, you could probably generalize from this experience, particularly in Cambodia, to other marketing campaigns, that if the sales agents are not motivated, if they cannot build some goodwill and trust with the user that they are trying to influence, then regardless of the marketing campaign, it's not going to be so effective. And that leads to the final point, which is that cooking decisions are extremely complex. It's clear that, from the work Marie has been doing in Kenya and Zambia, from this attempt to use marketing messages, to health messaging, to influence people's purchase, adoption of a cleaner cooking technology, that it's complex. It's not easy to do, and it takes kind of multiple sort of influencing factors to achieve it. And doing research to understand those complex drivers of behavior is tricky, and that's, I think, the key challenge. So how is an NGO or a socially minded business with limited resources put into this. Even the larger private companies don't always have the resources to put into really understanding behavior and the complexity of behavior. I think the user journey is actually something that can be modified and the user journey mapping and used in a relatively cost-effective way. And that's something that would be good to explore, to understand the users and to really gauge how they make decisions and how then what different interventions need to be done to influence their decisions to purchase cleaner cook stoves, adopt clean cooking practices. So I'll end there. And I hope that's been useful. I think this was a really interesting process for SNV as a sort of implementer in an NGO and implementer in the cook stove space to learn about actually is this the way we should be doing it, or and what approaches do we need to try and convince people to adopt these cleaner technologies. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Oliver, for that incredibly insightful presentation. We are a little over time, but for those participants still on the line, we still have some time for some Q&A. Let's get to it. The first one coming in is Judith, and Oliver, she's asking if, let me just scroll up a bit. Judith is asking if you could discuss a little bit about affordability rather than strictly price. Is this something that could be done in any way? Oliver?
Sorry, I'd muted. Thanks. A very good question. Thanks, Judith. It's true, the price is sort of usually the one-off. Are you going to buy it? But so what does it cost? But affordability really takes perhaps into account, the affordability of the price, the cost of the cook stove, the cost of the fuels, the kind of sustained use, and how that is affordable, and how that sort of matches the income and kind of the way people earn income. That it's interesting. The same issue when it comes to replacing kerosene with solar lighting. Challenge because a solar lamp might cost a lot, and months worth of income, whereas you buy kerosene on a daily basis. So in terms of affordability, we have to consider not just the total price. It may be comparable, but over the time scale that you're spending that money and in what amount. So I appreciate that. These stoves are a challenge from price and affordability. They're expensive to buy, but the second issue is the fuels you use, which in Kenya there is a struggle over pellets, which are typically used within these gasifying stoves, and access to pellets. There's no pellet manufacturer yet in Kenya, so they're imported, and so there's not just concern over the cost, but the availability of that fuel as well. So I appreciate the point, and we shouldn't just speak about price as a factor. Perhaps the broader notion of affordability would be more appropriate.
Thank you, Oliver. The next question is, can you say anything about the ultimate price that should be charged?
It's a good point. I'm not sure. I'm not sure we really know. For instance, if it's just, let's take price, but appreciating Judith's point about affordability, but the price of the stove, if we think about, whether the right price will be the point at which the market takes off, that would be a very conventional kind of free market perspective, then the price is not right at all at the moment. It's very high, although coming down with the different stoves and you know, as iterations of the stove and develop, and there's even local stoves in both Cambodia and Kenya, which you know, could compete perhaps, then you know, it's hard to say what the appropriate or the ultimate price that should be charged. You have to. We know that if this to really have an impact, then we need a market-based system. So there has to be money going back to the developers, to the stove producers, to cover their costs. It's not giving away freebies, but so I probably can't answer that, unfortunately.
Yeah, a very tricky question indeed. The next one is, are you aware of any research that looks at variations in perceptions of health risks across different contexts and cultures? You know, it's particularly interested in how the perception of risk of non-communicable diseases changes with development.
That's really interesting. I think this is where the research needs to go, really, and decent research. Well, by that I mean research that, you know, we can really make firm conclusions. I think the research that the SNV commissioned was really, really useful, but of course limited time and funding meant that it was tricky to get conclusive results. I'm interested in beyond just the health risks, but how do people change their energy consumption, particularly in cooking consumption, as in different contexts and cultures and I think economic income levels, for instance, and that's not clear. Whether people move to the urban area, they earn more, they then move to another fuel, a higher tier stove and fuel. That's not clear either. So I think it's clear that the perceptions or the health awareness was different in different contexts. In rural Cambodia, peri-urban Kenya, as you may maybe expect, but I don't know of any research really looking at the variations of the health risks. And the second thing is, even if there is variation, or even if everyone knows the health risks, it's clear that that may not be having a major impact on decisions to minimize those risks, i.e. using a cleaner cook stove. The awareness, even if it's different or even if it's the same, is not necessarily having an impact. But I think there's still plenty of scope for research on that, and it's something that would be interesting to hear from the GAC, from the Global Alliance. You know, as they're developing this repository of behaviour change knowledge, you know, maybe that they know of some research that I don't that does look at that. Probably there is outside of the cook stove sector, maybe.
Great, and might be the last question here. Were there any gender differences in the findings?
Not that. Well, that's a good question. There were gender differences in the sort of who was buying the stove. I think that seemed to be clear, but there wasn't. I didn't see clear sort of gender differences in the findings. But that is something I could go back and check. We didn't report on it, so I'm not sure if it was very clearly explored or there was any differences found. So I'm happy to look into that to check. I don't think it was the main focus, or it wasn't really. But I think there was some results, so I'm going to have to get back to you on that.
Okay, well, if there are no more remaining questions, we will conclude the webinar. Thank you again for your participation and for your time. Please be reminded to look out for our recording of our presentation on the Alliance's YouTube channel. And should you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact any one of us on the slides here. Thank you, Oliver and Marie, for that really interesting, hopefully very useful presentation to many of our partners here on the presentation. Thank you, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thanks a lot.